Hello. Now that I put a couple weeks on the G303 Wireless, I think I'm finally ready to do a full review. After doing a lot of testing and revisiting some of my old favorites in my collection, I can very safely say that this is my new main mouse, and even my endgame claw grip shape. So today I want to explain why I like this mouse, and also describe the very specific niche that it sits in an effort to try to help you guys figure out if this is going to work out for you, or if it is even worth your attention. This is absolutely something special if it can click for you, but only if it can click for you. So I'm excited to get into a detailed review for you all today. Alright, let's get into it. The very first thing that I need to discuss about this mouse is the shape. The entire package is great, it is a Logitech mouse after all, but the shape is so radically different from everything else out there that if it doesn't work out for you in that regard, nothing else matters. And it can very easily be unusable for you despite its incredible quality. But first, for reference, my hands are 18 by 9 to 9.5 centimeters. What makes the G303 shape so special is that it is a highly aggressive and unsafe design that is made for one style of grip. Designing a mouse shape around targeting one of three specific grip styles, that is fingertip, claw, or palm, is still pretty common and plenty of mice do this. Having a very clear design goal and use case in mind can net you very good results. For claw grip in particular, you actually have a lot of options out there. But where the G303 starts to differentiate its design from these other, more common claw grip focused mice, is that it's not just made for claw in general, but instead it's specifically focused on being perfect for one single subset of claw grip. It's not a claw grip chameleon like some of these other mice I have here that can work for a very wide variety and variation in grip styles. It is highly focused on one very specific use case. The specific style that the G303 is built around is what is called a pincher claw grip. The style is a little bit easier to describe with a more neutral shape, so I'll illustrate it on the ultimate potato, the GPX, first. Like all of the claw grip variations, the most important part about pincher claw is of course how you curl your fingers. You'll see here that they are not laid flat, and instead I curl them back to activate more muscles in my hand and forearm, and overall get a more aggressive, activated grip. But where it starts to differ from some of these other styles of claw grip is where the mouse actually makes contact on your hand. Instead of being very relaxed and resting my palm on top of the mouse to make contact all throughout this middle portion, or instead pulling the mouse into the very back of my hand to make contact across the heel here. Pincher claw strives to make contact in only these 2 points at the very edge of your palm, right on the meaty part underneath your pinky and thumb. This grip style ends up getting the pincher name because in order to pull it off, you have to pinch the back hump portion with those 2 aforementioned areas of your palm. This is where all of your stability comes from in this grip. Instead of making full, complete hand contact in the middle portion of your palm, or pulling the mouse back to reinforce your grip a little bit deeper, all of your stability comes from this squeezing action of the back rearmost portion. There are also variations of pincher claw where you don't actually make contact with this meaty portion of your thumb. Instead, you just kind of let the mouse float a little bit, and completely reinforce your grip on the pinky side here. I don't use this style personally, and I always mount both sides of my palm, but I know that that is a pretty common variation of this specific grip style. This style of grip is what I always use if a certain shape allows it, and it is by far what I'm most comfortable with using. Now back to the mouse in question, the G303. This pretty radical looking diamond shaped design was tailor made for this one specific style of grip. And since this is my usual style, this is why the mouse works out so well for me. It is still incredible how quickly the shape clicked and how well it has been holding up over time. It is truly a perfect match between grip style and mouse shape. It is extremely impressive. This is why I want to tailor most of my discussion about the shape in relation to the specific style of grip. They both go hand in hand to create an absolutely incredible experience. So I want to try to explain why it works so well with this mouse, and also give you a guide for how to use this shape to its fullest. Alright, so the first place you should always start off with when discussing a claw grip focused mouse is the hump. It is the part of the shape that interacts with your palm, and it is what most defines the mouse's overall hand feel. And on the G303 in particular, it is its most iconic feature and what will likely make or break the shape for most people. When I pull up the same mini claw grip sampler that I had up earlier, you can pretty clearly see that they all get wider in the back. They have narrow fronts and these nice gentle swoops that flare out to make their widest points in this very back region right here. This is an extremely common design you see because it makes it very easy to get hand support in a normal claw grip. These large bulbous humps just so easily fill out your hand, and really all you have to do is just pick them up the most naturally, and you instantly get full, stable support. And of course, this design works. That's why you see it so much. It's very comfortable, very natural, and very universal. Prior to the G303, these are all some of my absolute favorite mice. So when you start to consider this common, highly effective design language across a very wide variety of claw grip-centric mice, the G303's hump design starts to look even weirder. Especially when you consider that pincher-style claw grip that I was talking about earlier. Ostensibly, the G303 has nowhere to place your hand on. These 2 regions that I mount my grip on in my normal pincher-style claw grip are just simply missing on this diamond-shaped back. These 2 regions on the very edge of these wide humps that I normally place my hand on seem to be completely missing from this diamond-shaped back. How can I get a proper grip when it seems like there's nothing to grip? However, despite how it may seem, the G303 can easily get you just as much hand contact, support, and stability as a much wider mouse like the XM1. But this equivalent level of support is entirely contingent upon your ability to execute the proper pincher claw grip on the G303. Where this execution starts is that you must very aggressively pinch the back of this hump. The goal here is to match the angle that the mouse makes with your hand when you fold it in. And then once you properly match this angle, you have to squeeze. And I want to put a lot of emphasis on the squeeze part here. This bag is so thin and relatively small to the rest of the mouse's body that it can be a little bit difficult to get a grip, unless you're really able to tuck it into this back pocket and give it a good amount of pressure. I think that for many people, this will be highly uncomfortable for them. In fact, this increased level of tension compared to any other mouse that I've used was my biggest concern for the shape's long-term viability for me personally. I had to apply so much pressure in such an awkward way that I'm not quite used to that I was concerned about it causing a strain injury. However, I was able to get used to this very unique feeling quickly, and the muscles did build up fast. Now I experience no fatigue, and my hand strength has built to the point where this grip feels very solid. I think that if you are willing to put in the time to build up your inner hand muscles, then this should not be an issue. Just be aware that for the first few days, it can feel highly uncomfortable and pretty awkward. But while I do feel that you can get used to this sort of tension, I do understand that a lot of people like to use a more relaxed mouse grip. And I think that if you are one of those people, this mouse will not work out for you. It can feel very awkward and clunky if you want to be more relaxed or have a flatter hand. And while the shape may still work for you if you use one of these types of grips, I do feel that you will be better served by a more relaxed shape that can more naturally fit you. But like I said earlier, if you can get that aggressive pinch down, this mouse gives you a very surprisingly high amount of support and a very comfortable amount of palm contact. This is largely due to how abnormally tall the Hump is. For reference, it is even a little bit taller than the XM1 I have here, which is already a very large Hump mouse. This extra height on the back here is what allows it to hit the middle portion of your hand, before this diamond shape starts to invade the back portion here. It very comfortably makes deep contact right in this middle pocket of my palm. It doesn't actually make that much contact overall because these very outside edges of my palm are completely free. But it hits so deeply and so fully right in the middle portion here that it definitely has that full hand-feeling feel. You can really tuck this angular back into your palm very comfortably. And this sort of comfort may seem weird because it does look like the shape is very angular and sharp. But these angles are actually extremely well designed, and your hand actually does not make contact on any of these sharp, aggressive curves. Instead, the part of the shape that your hand makes contact with is actually flattened out. You can see that the front portion is very flat and angular, but once you start to go into the back hump, it gets rounded out. It has its widest point right here in the middle, and then it flattens out towards the top. And it is on this relatively flat, nicely rounded portion that your hand will make the vast majority of its contact. And of course, the same thing is mirrored on the other side. It is, after all, a symmetrical shape. This makes it so that the mouse does not jut into any portion of your hand, and instead the meaty portions of your palm just follow these curves. This makes it so that instead of the sharp angles jutting into your hand, the meaty portions of your palm instead wrap around and follow these flat portions on the side. These nice flat points of contact feel very comfortable, and you do not notice any of the sharpness of the overall design. This also gives it such high stability despite it being a small hump overall. These flattened out portions amplify the amount of surface area that makes contact, and when you combine this high surface area with how deeply it hits into your hand, you get an experience where the stability feels just as good as much larger humped mice. It is just impressive the amount of comfort, stability, and overall secureness you feel with this hump. These flat portions of the hump also allow it to work very well for a tilted grip. You have a lot of area to place your hand along this right side flat spot, so you can very easily start to aggressively rotate your wrist and still get all the support that you want. Still, no areas jut into your hand, and it is highly comfortable. It feels very comfortable to pinch this hump in even the most aggressively tilted grips. So while I have been harping on how much stability this hump gives you, it also has the added bonus of it feeling unrestrictive due to how thin it is. Most of these mice with wide, supportive backs end up feeling like they make a little bit of a trade-off for their extra stability. It is so hard to get a full, flexible range of motion when the back is so wide and it ends up impacting the very edges of your palm during normal use. This sort of trade-off between stability and maneuverability is usually just something that you have to deal with. You'll likely end up liking one more than the other, and leaning into mice that can either provide you high mobility or high stability. But the G303's design is so radical in this regard that it ends up breaking the mold, by simultaneously providing you the extra stability of a wide hump with the extra maneuverability of a much smaller mouse, all without making any trade-offs for either. It is able to do this because the back of the hump is so thin that you can actually change the angle that you grip the mouse at. I can very easily pull the mouse up with my fingers, and then decrease the angle that my hand makes to pinch the hump a little bit further. Doing this, I'm able to maintain the same amount of support but while moving the mouse upward. Likewise, I can also do the same in a downward motion, where I pull the mouse into my hand using my fingers, and then I increase the angle of my hand to allow for more room. Here the back of the hump is so thin it still doesn't impact the bottom portion of my palm. Here I now have a full vertical range of motion, all while maintaining a very consistent grip and amount of hand contact. This combination of both high support and mobility is what makes the G303's hump design so special and high performance. It is truly unique in this regard, and it'll offer you an experience like no other. However, what it actually sacrificed for its high support and mobility is its ability to be widely appealing to all types of users. You absolutely have to be able to aggressively pinch the hump in order to get any of these benefits. You can't just pull it into the back of your hand like a normal claw grip, or lazily rest your hand on top of the mouse. And all these other variations aside from this very specific pincher style claw grip that I've been discussing, you simply will not get the benefits, and this mouse shape will not be worth it. This is absolutely the main issue that people will have. Some people will not be able to adapt this very specific grip. This is why it's niche. There's a certain, and I would say fairly large portion of the population that this will just be unusable, or at least highly unoptimal for. But the important thing to consider here is that that opinion is of course entirely valid. It should not be your goal to go out and find the best, most high-performing mouse out there. Instead, you should find something that fits your preferences and that you enjoy using. And the reality is that this hump will be highly alienating, and a lot of people, rightly so, cannot be bothered to learn it. But if you do want to learn how to grip this mouse properly, I think I actually have a pretty good exercise that you can practice. What you should try to do is pick up the mouse by the hump alone, like so. If you can get this technique down where all the force is applied through your palm into the hump, you can start to get an idea of how you're supposed to pick this mouse up. Of course it won't feel exactly the same, and you will have to adjust your hand a little bit. But this sort of exercise can give you a good idea of the angle that you need to make your hand, as well as how much pressure you actually need to apply to the sides in order to get a solid grip. Once you can start incorporating some of these concepts into your normal mouse grip, I feel that your experience can start to get exponentially better. And then if this still doesn't work for you and you start to get a solid grip and it's just uncomfortable and does not work out, then it's probably time to move on. So while the G303's hump is certainly the star of the show, these very aggressive, sharply angled sides also stand out. They're another extremely unique feature that gives this mouse a very specific hand feel. Most mice you'll see will either go with these very flat, pretty straight sides, or these more curvy, swooping designs. Then again, the G303 completely throws these conventions out. It has these really weird sides that are flat in the front, come to a sharp angle, and then swoop off. You absolutely can feel all these curvatures in hand, and it does not go away. In hand, this mouse has a highly unique, distinctly diamond-esque feel. It is immediately recognizable and not quite like anything else I've ever used. It truly is an iconic design. Most notably, the super aggressive curvature ends up putting the widest point of the mouse right here in the back middle portion. Most mice, even pretty straight ones like the GPX, almost always end up putting their widest point in the very back portion here. This positioning of the widest point allows you to very naturally place your fingers. You are not obstructed by anything and you are free to find a grip that is comfortable for you. You feel very flexible when the widest point hits in your hand instead of up here on your fingers. This lack of flexibility that you get on the G303 due to its widest point occurring in the middle is what makes this diamond shape feel so odd in hand. It feels like you have to wrap your fingers around this point, because you are not actually intended to grip the mouse right here. The actual place for you to put your fingers is right above the bulge, just a little bit in front of the sensor. This makes this wide bulge portion of the mouse shape you feel like an obstacle that your fingers have to first overcome in order to get a proper grip. I totally anticipate this feeling very awkward for a lot of people. No other mouse forces your hand to wrap around something so high up on the shape. Personally, this only felt weird for a couple of minutes, and I was able to get used to it almost instantly. It is because in my normal style of grip, I already have a little bit of a pocket where this widest point occurs. You can see here that I already have a lot of space right underneath my thumb, and of course underneath my pinky here as well. I like to float my grip here and get a lot more freedom by not making as much contact in these areas. This made the transition to the G303 super easy for me, because as you can see, the widest point perfectly fills this air gap that I already had on other shapes. My fingers easily clear this widest portion, and I could get them to where I am intended to grip it. And if you're able to have this gap here and get your fingers past this widest point, the mouse grip does start to feel pretty normal, and you actually don't really notice this wide bulge. But you absolutely have to be able to get your fingers to past this point first. This is why I think that this mouse could be pretty bad for small and particularly thin hands. You need to be able to have a wide enough palm to wrap around this hump properly. It is very important that when you wrap around and pinch the hump like this, that your fingers end up sitting high enough for them to be able to get into a comfortable position right where you're intended to grip it. If you don't have enough palm and your fingers end up sitting a little bit lower, when you fail to wrap around the hump enough, then your thumb will be at a very awkward angle and end up gripping the mouse at the widest point, making it feel very bulky and quite clunky. And then likewise on the other side, if you don't have enough palm to wrap around, your fingers can pretty easily end up falling off when you try to curl them back. There's absolutely no space for you to place your fingers here, and this ridge is your hard cutoff. Personally, my hand width of about 9 to 9.5 centimeters is absolutely perfect for this mouse, and when I start to wrap my palm around the hump, it perfectly positions my fingers to very comfortably get into where I'm intended to grip it. I think people with thinner palms should be very careful. And of course, the shape could still work out for you. After all, size preferences are highly personal, but there's a very high potential for this mouse to feel uncomfortably wide if you don't have enough palm to grip it properly. And also, while we're on the topic of general hand size recommendations, I think that particularly short fingers will also run into some issues with the shape. This is because you actually have deceptively little button length on the G303. The angle that their split click design makes ends up shortening the usable portion of the clicks by quite a bit. If you have shorter hands and very aggressively curl your fingers, you could pretty easily end up hitting the very edges of these clicks. Here the buttons can become quite hard to press and just very awkward feeling overall. And you really don't have to curl them back that far to get to this point either. The buttons are deceptively far forward. And this could make certain aggressive grips completely unusable for small-handed users. And you also lose out on these very nice comfort grooves that the main buttons have when you grip them so far back. These grooves only actually start in the middle of the clicks. But if your grip does allow you to use them like mine does, then they do feel very good and help to lock your fingers in, but not feel super restrictive because they are still pretty shallow. But if you grip very far forward or very far back, you completely lose these comfort grooves and they're completely flat. The coating is still fairly grippy, so I don't think you're going to end up sliding around, but still to have the grooves cover the entire length of the buttons would be preferable. Then as far as larger hand users, I really don't have any concerns. I think that you should be able to get the same exact grip that I do, but just a little bit easier. With my hand size and grip style, I feel like this mouse fits me like a glove. The margins are very tight and the mouse feels extremely snug in my hand. Even larger hands should be able to pull off the same grip, but just have a little bit more room for error. You won't have to tuck it in as tightly as I do, and if anything, it would likely be slightly more comfortable. So while this middle wide point may seem pretty pointless because of how it alienates smaller handed users, it actually does give you some very great benefits if your hands are big enough to utilize it properly. And most notably, it gives you a very great thumb groove. This very aggressive, very wide ridge that it creates gives you an excellent guide on where to place your thumb. It almost serves like a marker to allow you to get a very consistent, very replicatable grip. It's not like a flat side where your thumb position is pretty nebulous, and you can end up picking the mouse up a little bit differently every time. You have a very easy tactile guide that helps you out on where to place your thumb in a consistent position every single time. And this very aggressively angled ridge also gives your thumb a lot of stability. And no matter how hard you pull back or how much force you apply, your thumb will sit very securely right on this ridge. Once again, the flatter mice, I feel that when I start to pull down, my thumb ends up sliding off the back of the mouse. Of course, it doesn't happen this extremely in-game, but I do feel it moving around a little bit. I certainly feel limited on how much I can use my thumb to aim with these flatter sides. But then on the G303, no matter how hard I pull back with my thumb, I'm absolutely locked in position, and I feel very strong, very powerful. This strong feeling both helps me lock the mouse in place, and allows me to pull it back into my hand to create more palm contact and stability, as well as give me greater mouse control, because now all the force I apply with my thumb goes directly into the mouse. Nothing gets lost with my thumb sliding around, and I could use these muscles here as much as I want to aim. I would highly recommend these aggressive thumb positionings, and if you can get used to it, I feel that it will directly improve your mouse control. You should feel so much stronger and so much more precise when you are able to properly integrate your thumb into controlling your mouse. And getting it more perpendicular to the side is a great first place to start. As well as design is pretty crazy and quite angular, it is still super comfortable. It is actually quite smoothly rounded, and the actual place that you place your thumb on is completely flat. This makes it feel very comfortable, and I don't notice any of these sharp edges jutting into my thumb. It is very surprisingly comfortable. This flat portion here also allows for a pretty flexible thumb position. I always felt that a mouse like the Rocket Cone series that have similarly aggressive thumb grooves would somewhat restrict my thumb positioning and force me into a very specific grip style, and I really didn't have a choice about it. But since these sides are flat, you can really adjust your thumb to how you'd like it. You can either come in from the bottom, approach it from up top in a more tilted style like I normally do, or even flatten out your thumb. Just like a lot of other things on this mouse, it feels extremely balanced and very well designed. Now, even though the right side curvature is identical to the left, it still works equally as well to facilitate a nice, strong grip. Just like with the thumb side, I feel that you have a pretty high degree of freedom on where you want to place your fingers. These completely flat sides just give you so much freedom. There really isn't a wrong place to place these two fingers. This allows you to experiment a little bit and find out what's most comfortable for you personally. Although I do feel that there is one thing that you should be really concerned with about your ring finger placement, and that is that you should aim to make as much contact with the side of the pad of your ring finger as possible. If you can match this very aggressive angles that the side makes with your ring finger when you wrap it around in your grip, you should feel very strong and very locked in. This greater surface area that you're applying all your force with, it should allow you to feel much stronger in both your grip strength and how much force you can actually apply into the mouse with your ring finger to improve your aim. It feels so nice to have your ring finger locked in and feel like you can use it to a very high degree to control your mouse. I also feel that this high amount of contact can help create a more consistent grip. When the sides of a mouse are much more flat, you could pretty easily start to roll your ring finger when you grip harder. I definitely notice it in game, and my grip does shift a little bit when I get higher tensioned. I have been able to get used to this, but it does create a very different feel between relaxed and high tension grips. But then on the G303, no matter how hard I squeeze, the angle that my ring finger makes is very consistent. My grip does not shift around nearly as much, and I feel noticeably more locked in. Then as far as your pinky placement, you could pretty much do anything. Personally, I like to reinforce my grip right at this ridge like I do with my thumb. Here I feel like I can apply a lot of downward force and push the mouse into my meaty portion of my thumb. I feel like this just adds a little bit of stability. I don't really control my mouse with this finger, but it does feel like it can help lock in my grip a little bit more. And then you can also follow this top curve with your pinky here and lock it in underneath your ring finger. I don't normally like this style of grip, but it does feel very comfortable in this mouse in particular. It feels pretty supportive and quite comfortable. It is definitely doable like this. I do still feel that I lose the stability I gained from curling my pinky back, but it was still surprisingly usable and, most importantly, comfortable. Now the final thing that I would talk about the shape are these very aggressively concave sides that I've already touched on a little bit. Creating such extreme angles like this, I feel helps me get a much stronger grip on this mouse. It feels like I can wrap my hand around in a more claw-like fashion. This is entirely due to the wide top and narrow bottom. But while this does feel very nice in a claw grip for me personally, this will make the mouse feel a little bit large, but in a very strange way. Once again, you need to have enough palm to wrap your hand around up top, as well as from the back like I talked about earlier. But if you can do this, just like the weird wide point in the middle, once you get around the top, it starts to feel much more normal, but you have to be able to wrap your hands around properly. Then once you're able to wrap your hands around, it makes the mouse much easier to pull up. You can really squeeze the mouse into the back of your palm with your fingers, because of these nice super aggressive angles that the sides make. It's also very easy to pick up the mouse when you're resetting it. Normally I like to reset my grip a lot and I almost entirely wrist aim. So being able to pick up a shape easily is absolutely critical. When mice like the EC2 end up being curved the other way, it makes them significantly harder for me to pick them up and do frequent resets. It is still doable if the coding is good enough, but it feels significantly less comfortable and I have to put a lot more effort. Shapes like those really make me appreciate these aggressively concave sides. It is so easy and so effortless to get this nice floaty mouse feeling. These very aggressive angles also make the mouse feel much thinner towards the bottom. It is very possible to get a narrow grip feel despite this mouse's size if you position your fingers touching the pad, and you grip the mouse as low as physically possible. Initially, I really like this about the shape. I am a huge fan of thin grip width, and I feel that when I get my fingers close together, I can be more precise. This feeling is certainly doable if you are willing to have your fingers drag a little bit. But also if you don't like this feeling, you can actually grip the mouse much higher and still get great results. Once again, these sides are so flat that you're really flexible in where you place your fingers up and down them. Shroud's grip in particular, as indicated by these little dots on the side, end up placing your fingers very high up, even on the thumb side over here as well. This grip feels super durable and still very secure, because you have this little ridge to reinforce your grip with at the very top. On most other mice, it can be pretty hard to get your fingers up this high, because you don't end up having that same ridge, and instead they kind of curl off a little bit more. It is super surprising that you can place your fingers almost bleeding over the edge on the G303 and still get a very strong, very secure grip. And even though I normally do like thin grips, and this finger positioning does make the mouse feel pretty wide, I actually did like using this grip a lot, and I think it is super viable even for me personally. This is because that when you can place your fingers so high, it gets them almost in line and on the same plane as your index and middle fingers. When your fingers are all lined up like this, you feel much stronger in your grip. A good way to think about this would be to imagine gripping a barbell. When your fingers are all in line, you feel very strong and very secure in your grip. But if you start to separate them off like this, you lose a lot of strength. This is basically what gripping a mouse with high button height and your fingers down low to the pad would feel like. You're starting to separate out your hands and overall making your curling strength much less strong. So getting your fingers high up on the G303 does feel very strong, and I would recommend that you experiment with it a little bit. Of course, I still do like a thinner grip width, so what I ended up doing was adapting my grip to end up right in the middle of the sides, so now I'm able to combine a little bit of both of these feelings. And this type of adjustment is only doable because of how flexible your finger positions are up and down the sides of this mouse. So all in all, the very aggressive design decisions of the G303 shape give it very high potential. This unique, highly angular back combines a very high amount of support with excellent mobility, all without making significant trade-offs. And then these aggressive, diamond-shaped sides also allow you to get a very secure, very strong grip that allows you to control the mouse very efficiently. However, in order to get any of these benefits out of the shape, you have to use a very specific type of claw grip, and your hand has to be the right size. Plus, even if you are able to meet these requirements, the shape will still feel unlike anything else. And that weirdness and uncomfortability alone could very easily ruin this mouse for you. The G303's potential for endgame level performance is only outmatched by its potential to alienate so many users that don't exactly fit the bill of who this mouse caters to. This is my perfect shape, and the performance seems nearly unbeatable, but this design is so funky that it is still such a hard recommendation for me to make. I really hope that this video can help people with similar preferences to mine figure out if this shape will work out well for them. Because I really want other people to have the same experience I had with this mouse, where it just instantly clicked, and as always felt absolutely perfect. But I also don't want anybody to spend a bunch of money on a mouse that could legitimately hurt your hand. So please be very careful when deciding to give this mouse a shot. Alright, so now that we've finished the exhaustive shape overview, and you've hopefully figured out if this mouse is even going to be usable for you, and now we can start to talk about some of the more general features that make Logitech mice so quality. To start off, the build quality is absolutely excellent. Of course, I already expected greatness from Logitech, but this definitely exceeds my expectations. This mouse is solid. There's no creaking, no flexing, it feels like an absolute tank. Its build quality is easily on par with Vaxi, Zowie, and the X1R. The actual plastic used feels very high quality as well. It has a very premium feel all around. In hand, this feels like one of the most high quality mice out there. However, there is still one pretty minor issue that I have. I get this very weird, very minor rattle when I shake the mouse. I'm not even sure if it'll pick up on my mic, but I'll try. The odd part about this is that there is some definite rattle, but I can't tell where it's coming from. It's not the actual wheel, and when I hold that down and shake it, I don't feel it moving at all. And it isn't the clicks either. Once again, those feel pretty solid. Side buttons, same thing. D-pad button, sensor, it all feels totally solid. But something about the internals just rattles around a little bit during very vigorous movements. Of course, I never noticed this during playing, and it doesn't actually affect me at all. But it is still a little bit concerning. I have no idea what is actually broken, or if anything even is broken, and it's just some weird design flaw that it has. Regardless, I'm still not going to return or do anything with my mouse. It still works totally fine, and I never notice it unless I'm looking for it. I will keep you updated though if this changes. In addition to premium quality, you also get a flawless wireless experience from Logitech. It feels absolutely perfect, both from what I can tell and by objective measurements. It is just as good, if not better, than other wired options. And personally, I think that this feels even better than some wired mice. I'm probably just schizo posting here, and most likely is exactly the same. But I swear that there's something special about the Hero sensor. If for some reason this mouse feels so much smoother and so much sharper than other mice I've used. It almost feels like I'm using a higher pulling rate mouse or something. I know this probably shouldn't be the case, but for some reason, the sensor just hits. I swear I can feel a difference when I switch back to something like a Zowie mouse. It's just so smooth and so crisp. But I don't know, I'm probably just schizoing out. And the battery life in the wireless mode is nuts as well. Logitech's system of idling the mouse out to preserve battery when it's not in use is absolutely perfect. I got this mouse at 50% battery, and I didn't turn it off for 11 days before it died. That is 11 days of daily use, all without never flipping the switch. And mind you, it was only at 50%. This could last you almost a month at a full charge. Logitech Wireless is simply built different. And now just while we're on the sensor, I will say that the liftoff distance on this mouse is really low. It feels just a touch lower than most common LODs, and you cannot change it. What you get out of the box is your only option. That is the one fault of the Hero sensor. I was able to get used to this really low LOD pretty quickly, but it was something that I did have to get used to. It was noticeably lower. I don't think this should be a huge issue, and most people will be able to adapt to it, but it is something they have to be aware of. And if you are someone that really likes high settings, then you might have some troubles adjusting to this. I am still somewhat worried about aftermarket feet though, because these stock feet are pretty thin and don't come off the bottom that much. If you get much thicker than this, even by just a tiny bit, the LOD is going to start to feel scarily low. So I hope core pads keep their design pretty thin for this mouse. Now onto the coating. The top is exactly the same as what you'll find on the Superlight. It's that same very slightly rubberized, pretty smooth feeling plastic. It's actually fairly grippy, but it does pick up oils pretty easily. However, the coating on the top of the mouse is pretty irrelevant because the only place you actually touch it are on your 2 forefingers. Everywhere else that you actually make hand contact uses this completely raw, frosted plastic. This isn't actually coated, and it's just pure, like very slightly PPT plastic feeling. If you ever come in contact with frosted glass, like what we'd find on the SkyPad, then this texture should feel pretty familiar to you. It very much so has the same feel to it. I personally really like this, and it has become my favorite coating. This texture feels so good on my skin, and I get a nice sense of tactility. And it is also very grippy when you apply a little bit of pressure. It feels like you're able to press your skin into the little divots in the surface, and get a super secure, super locked in grip the moment you start to apply any sort of grip force. And it also works pretty good for sweat. On this mouse in particular, I definitely sweat a lot, but I don't notice this affecting my grip much, because when I start to squeeze the sides of the mouse even just a little bit, this texture does so much to lock my fingers in, and I don't notice any sort of like hydroplaning or sticky effect. I just get a nice secure grip without any of the downsides of a rubberized coating. I really like how well they executed these frosted plastic sides. Now onto the clicks. I actually quite like these clicks now, and started to like them more as I put more time onto the mouse. I would describe these clicks as feeling very crisp. They have very little travel overall. There's just a tiny bit of pre-travel and almost no post. Overall, there's a very noticeably short throw, and they're also very tightly tensioned. This gives them a pretty good amount of tactility, despite them being pretty generic on 20Ms. This tight tensioning also leans into them feeling very responsive. It feels like the moment you start to apply pressure, the click instantly actuates, and then once you let go, they snap back up quickly. The tensioning does make them ever so slightly stiff though, in my opinion. They definitely aren't hard to press, but when you have such a short travel, with a medium amount of actuation force required, it will lend to them feeling just slightly stiff. The split shell design that I mentioned earlier also leads to them feeling very consistent. They feel pretty uniform at the top and bottom. The only actual issue is when your fingers start to bleed over the edge like I talked about earlier. Here those start to feel very stiff and unresponsive. Now onto the side buttons. These are very sneaky good for me. I would say that they're pretty easily some of my favorites. They pretty easily have the least amount of pre and post travel I've ever experienced. They are very surprisingly crisp. I always thought that copious amounts of pre or post travel was just a requirement of side buttons, but these tell me they actually can do this right. The side buttons are very light and still pretty tactile. They have a very satisfying response and just feel good to press. Easily one of my favorite side buttons. Although they actually do have one other issue that could potentially be quite major, and that is that they sit very high up on the side. As you can see here, they aren't actually on the very side face of the mouse. Instead, they're on this little ridge up here. This makes it so it feels like your thumb has to go up above this ridge in order to click them properly. In my old grip style where I held it very close down to the bottom, I couldn't actually actuate the front side button. But now in my new style that's a little bit higher up, they are perfectly accessible. But it still certainly feels like I have to roll my finger up to hit them. And this can be a little uncomfortable for some. This will be very grip dependent though, and it kind of depends how beefy your thumb is or where you position it. Now onto the feet. Overall, they're very surprisingly not bad. They are the same weird off-gray colored PTFE that you see on the Superlight, but surprisingly, they are far less scratchy. They are genuinely smooth and good on a very wide variety of surfaces. Even on more textured surfaces like the Hightail 2 I have here, I don't actually notice any scratchiness getting introduced, and it's still a smooth, somewhat premium feeling experience. I really don't think that these are feet that you're going to need to replace, even on these types of surfaces. I still don't really like them that much though, because they will feel slow coming from the aftermarket options that I am used to. Especially on the smooth control surfaces like the PA. It feels like these feet start to drag across the pad, instead of getting that nice, smooth, clean glide that you would experience on something like Core Pads or Tiger Ice or any of the other aftermarket options. This dragging feeling isn't necessarily bad, but it just isn't something that I prefer. And I definitely like that nice, clean glide feeling of Core Pads. So I certainly will replace them with Core Pads once they come out, which actually should happen pretty soon. Alright, now onto the scroll wheel. Overall, I would describe this as weird, but good. As you can see here, it is completely rubber coated instead of having tactile bumps. Initially, I thought I would absolutely hate this. I really love the nice tactile feeling I get from... I really like the nice tactile feeling on a scroll wheel I can get from the extra texture. But surprisingly, I really like this. It feels very grippy and I never lose my grip. The actual tactility of the scroll itself also feels pretty good. The steps are well defined and has a nice bouncy feeling. If you like very tactile, very clearly defined steps, then this should be something that you'll like. Although I will say that it is not very tightly tensioned. There is still a good amount of resistance when you're scrolling, but I can pretty easily get the wheel stuck in between steps. It isn't the most crisp, and sometimes when I'm slowly scrolling through a page, I definitely notice it getting stuck in between settings, and then randomly flicking down and getting inputs when I don't want it to. but when I'm just flicking the wheel like I'd use it in game, it is absolutely perfect. Additionally, there's this weird issue on the scroll where it causes some pretty sick reverberation when you flick it. It seriously feels like the entire mouse vibrates when you do these very aggressive, vigorous flicks. This was super annoying at first. Whenever I was bunny hopping around, I could feel my entire mouse vibrate. I still can notice it, but I have gotten used to it. It doesn't bother me anymore, but I cannot ignore it. I really wish it wasn't there. Now, I have seen some people complain about the same reverberation issue when they're resetting their mouse, and this definitely can happen. If you tap it against the surface, you do feel the same vibrating effect. But personally, I don't run into this issue at all. Manning the SkyPad for a couple months got me into the habit of very lightly resetting my mouse. And when you combine this with the shape being very easy to pick up like I talked about earlier, it is super easy for me to be very gentle when I'm resetting. But I definitely can see this being a major issue for people who are heavy-handed. Alright, now onto the weight. This mouse is about 73 grams. Personally, I find this weight category to be extremely usable. I am very used to Zowie and Vaxi mice, so this is absolutely up my alley. I had no adjustment period, and this weight feels great even today. And one of the reasons that it still does feel so good is that it is very well balanced. The weight is perfectly centered, and it just simply feels as it should be. This helps the mouse feel a little bit lighter than it should be, actually. I think that even if you come from lighter options, you will pretty easily be able to get used to this, because of how well the weight is balanced. I almost feel like this fact is even more important than its actual on-paper weight. Mice that are front or back heavy can end up easily feeling worse than well-balanced, heavier options. Well, at least to me they do. Weight is very much personal preference. And what you're comfortable with controlling is the most important part. But one thing that I should say is that while I am very comfortable with this mouse's weight, I am absolutely a believer that lighter is always better. The physics are simply not on your side with heavier mice. Objectively, you will always have better control over a lighter mouse. It is only a matter of whether you are good enough to properly utilize it. So while this weight is still totally usable, I do 100% feel that a super light option would be even better. But until that comes out, I'm going to be totally fine with this mouse, at its current weight. Alright, now finally, I just want to quickly mention the value of this mouse. 100%, this is not a $130 mouse. Compared to other mice on the market, you are absolutely not getting what you pay for. Especially if we consider that this mouse is about the same price as a Superlight, since this does seem to be just permanently discounted at about $130, it is such a hard sell. The G303 is so unsafe that many people will just absolutely hate it and think that it is unusable. But for the same price and a lighter weight, with the same exact quality wireless, get a GPX that is nearly universal. Of course, I don't think it quite has the same potential as a G303. This shape could be absolutely perfect, while the GPX is just a potato. But it's impossible to ignore how usable it can be for so many people. There's a reason that this is the mouse that you see so many pros use. It is so easy to pick it up and get used to it, and still be able to perform at the absolute highest level. Now personally, I don't regret my purchase whatsoever, because this mouse is of course my perfect shape. But I would still love to see it cheaper. If it came in closer to $100, it'd be so much easier to recommend. But as it stands now, at $130, with such an unsafe shape, it is so hard to make this recommendation, unless you're pretty sure that the shape can work out as well for you as it did for me. So, in conclusion, this is my perfect shape. It was literally made for my exact grip style. I had no adjustment period, and this is the quickest I've ever felt so good on a mouse. And still, after about 2.5 weeks, it has held up just as well. And I still love it just as much. It simply does everything that I want it to, perfectly. I get the full support that I love from my nice wide-backed claw mice, but then I still get the full range of motion as something much smaller. I have overall great mouse control from how aggressively the sides are curved, and how well they can lock into my fingers, and on top of that, it's super comfortable. All the issues I had with strain went away after about a week, and I don't even have to think about this mouse in my hand anymore. It is insane how genuinely flawless this shape is for me. So much so that it's made so many other mice in my collection feel seemingly irrelevant. Nothing else has been hitting the same as this mouse for me recently. I've gone back through my collection and used all my old favorites. And now they feel all so awkward and just wrong for some reason. It's almost like I've tried the fentanyl of claw shapes. Everything else was so hollow and so incomplete now. This has completely recontextualized the way I think about claw grip shapes for me. This wasn't even something that I thought I'd like at all, yet somehow it is perfect. It is still unfortunately not my endgame mouse. It is my endgame shape, of course, but in order for something to be your endgame mouse, it has to be absolutely perfect in every regard. And I still cannot escape the fact that I think lighter is always better. So it seems like a G303 Superlight is the actual endgame, my true golden goose. And I don't even think that my hope here is completely unfounded. If you've seen the bearded bob teardown of this mouse, you will know that weight reduction is actually very simple to do. That insane battery life that I was talking about earlier is because the battery that they use is very large and very heavy. And then they also have a lot of very useless plastic in here, like the super stupid dongle drawer that they have here down at the very bottom. Once you start to remove stuff like this, change down to a lower life battery, you actually get a mouse that's around 60 grams. And I don't know about you, but I certainly trust Logitech engineers to do a proper weight reduction far more than some random Brit with a Dremel. So unfortunately Logitech will just have to take my money again. This is super frustrating, and I wish that this was just already a Superlight, but I'm not really that pissed because this mouse has allowed me to see the light. And if that means that I will have to get the Shroud preferred 70 gram weight, I am happy to make that concession. But this whole weight issue does actually lead me down to a pretty weird path. Because now I feel that the only logical option to go from here is to retest the good old M2K. I think that this mouse is the only thing I've ever used that even has the potential of beating the G303 or even a G303 Superlight. I think that by design the M2K is the highest potential mouse out there. It completely forces you to use a fingertip grip, which is theoretically the best type of grip. You by far have the greatest range of motion with this grip, especially on a mouse as short and stubby as the M2K. And also the type of muscles that you use for mouse control and the fingertip grip are the most precise in your entire body. Then, like I said earlier, lighter is always better, and 24 grams takes us to the extreme. The science is 100% on your side when it comes to the M2K. The only question is whether I can learn to properly use it. Now, I will say that currently I do perform better on the G303, quite easily actually, but when I used the M2K exclusively for about a month after I got it, I did notice myself very quickly improving, all the way through to the last day that I used it. And during that time, I had my absolute best moments of pure raw aim. The only thing that I actually struggled with was consistency, but even then my consistency was still improving by the day. And the only reason I ended up switching off the M2K actually, what I noticed when I was constantly transitioning between more typical mice, is that it always took me a very long time to readjust to the M2K, like literally almost a few days before I was even feeling comfortable again. This is mostly due to having to use a pure fingertip grip. I always use a claw or a claw fingertip hybrid on every other mouse that I used, so this was always the most awkward part of the transition. And frankly, I was just too lazy to put back in the work every time I was switching from a different mouse to relearn the M2K. But now that I have basically found my perfect shape, I'm a lot more motivated to try to bounce in between these two and see if I can properly integrate both of them into my main rotation. Of course, I am still going to be reviewing other mice, don't worry. I have the J13C coming in tomorrow, and I am actually pretty excited to make a full review on that. But on the side, I'm definitely going to be putting in the time on the M2K and trying to see if it can coexist within my main rotation. I'll probably re-review this mouse too, because my review posted for this was my very first video, and it is absolute dog shit. I genuinely feel bad for everybody that clicks on that. So hopefully I can point everybody to a much more high quality and more polished product if they want to know more about this very special mouse. Alright, that does it for this extremely long video. My voice is absolutely dying. I'll see you all in the next one.